Hello and welcome to Catholic in America. Today we're going to be looking back on the coronavirus.
We're going to talk a little bit about the church's response, maybe some of our hindsight so far, things maybe that the church would do differently, if we could do it over again, or if there were ever another worldwide pandemic, how should the church respond to it?
And is it possible that we made mistakes?
Yeah.
Welcome back to Catholic in America. So, coronavirus, guys.
All right.
What did we do right? What did we do wrong?
Trip down memory lane.
What did the church do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a
Not
church.
society as a
Where
whole.
are we?
I'm not.
Yeah, I don't think we have enough time to have that
But I
conversation.
think just in regards to how we handled it as a church, I think
we
it's
might not
good.
have enough time for that, how we handle the church, but we can try and give it our.
I mean, I'll jump in here as far as, it's 2023 as we're filming this right now. It's October of 2023. So just kind of recognizing, more stuff's going to keep unfolding. And maybe a decade from now, we'll have different views and different insights, kind of the steady stream of information, disinformation, half information, the interested policies. People have become billionaires. There's some certain companies that produce certain products in our country that have become billionaires, even more billionaires, multi-billionaires through this whole process. So there's a lot to sift through within that. But within the context of we're all pastors, we're all at parishes, we're with people, we're visiting hospitals, all that stuff that we experienced, what the church did and what we could have done better. I think one of the major things is what was unveiled for me is a unfortunate, for those who are Christians and followers of Jesus, fear of death.
Yeah.
That, to me, one of the things that was shown, and this is what I would say it'd be a huge step for us as Christians, is to say the worst thing that can happen to us is to die. And I don't know following Jesus, we should be saying, oh, actually, we've already died with Christ.
Right.
We know where we're going. So that shouldn't be the main animating fear there. But to me, that was one of the major things that kind of kept coming up over and over again. It's like, oh, this is the scariest thing in the world. It's like, no, the scariest thing in the world is to be apart from God.
Right.
And to not have the sacraments, to not have a relationship with Jesus, and not be God. When we do die, physically die, to be apart from God from all eternity, that would be the worst possible thing. So to me, I just kept thinking, like, man, imagine we put the same energy into preaching the gospel that we did into getting a hand sanitizer in every corner of every church in the world. Like, we'd be
Or the masks. Yeah, make sure you got a mask.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's something within that I think was a real, just kind of unearthed a unchristian spirit in most Christian churches and the way we make decisions. Right. And I was part of that too. So I'm not saying it's like, oh, the bishops did that. This is within my own parish as well. So
we did it too. I mean, and like you said, that energy that we put into that, and I mean, if you think about the kind of energy we put into things before that, I think you could say that type of energy was definitely in the pro-life movement. Maybe not to the extent, but there's some of it that the pro-life movement has an energy that's there that, in lots of our churches, and I'll include the ones I've been a part of, I'm not so sure that we put the emphasis on the details of things and things that had to be done like we did during coronavirus on our faith. I mean, it just was unequal. And then coming back now, have we went back into that? Or are we still, I mean, because what happens is you have this unconscious feeling that coronavirus was really that dangerous, was really that, huge and important, and that the other things that come before it and after it must not be that important to the church, because we're not putting the same amount of emphasis that we did on wearing a mask, on being 2 pews apart, on getting the vaccine or not getting the vaccine or whatever it may be. We're not putting those, at least at my parish, we're trying to be as intentional as possible, but it seems like we were so intentional then. And of course, in the face of crisis, you're going to be intentional. Mm-hmm. But man, the crisis that we're facing of people living eternally without God, there's not a greater crisis than that.
Yeah. I think that it's kind of a two-edged sword with one of the things that we kind of maybe did well, but also has been very problematic, is I think that for those parishes that did respond to the pastoral needs of the people, I think that it was a time of actually some interesting creativity which happened in terms of some interesting ways of outreach, interesting ways of evangelization between social media, and probably popularizing the use of social media and reaching out to people through technology, obviously doing the live stream masses, trying to meet people where they are. I know that a lot of places, I believe I think all of us did that. So
our bishop did a daily video for the first several months.
So still going.
Yeah.
Good thing. Yeah.
So so I think that the outreach to people using the popular mediums of technology and through social media and live streaming and things like that, I think that was good. I think that that's also been a two-edged sword, because that's also the thing is like you have to be careful of who you make a deal with as well, because now we've seen that people have gotten, and I was predicting this at the time, although I was just like, okay, look, we have to do this, but like, let's be careful in how we do this. And I'm not sure that still is in the conversation that's keep going on, because like then the question is like, lots of people got very complacent, and lots of Catholics got very complacent. For a lot of people, it broke their habit. It broke their habit of going to Mass, because you had like a lot of people who, I had people crying, like, and I know we all have people who were crying and like sending sometimes not the kindest emails out of so forth, because we're all dealing with it. So like there you have this great yearning from actually many people who yearn for the sacraments, were angry that the churches got closed for, I think in our diocese, with like a period of like 2 months.
So you're saying crying because they wanted to be at Mass.
Crying because they wanted to be at Mass, yes.
No,
there was a lot of people I experienced who upset and crying and were questioning everything that was going on. And so in terms of that, but then you also had a lot of people who were completely content, and some of whom still are completely content to sit at home on Sunday and to kind of watch the TV, watch the Mass from the TV, and that's kind of their weekly experience of the Eucharist. So I think that in terms of like the media outreach, I think it was good, but I think that it was also, there's a question where we do have to re-examine and look at that, because the question is, in the long term, did this help people in the short term? I think yes, but in the long term, has it also had the effect of possibly decrease? Obviously, there's a decrease in church attendance, as well as in terms of faithfulness, and well as people are just like, you had a lot of Catholics, I think, who were watching it on TV, and then they're just like, well, this is just as good as the being there. So, which is obviously not.
I can pause it whenever I want.
I can pause, yeah.
Yeah, can I say another thing too? I think as far as a lesson learned or an area of I would say, and this is probably on the more controversial side, that the church, one of the things I think most bishops are, the hill they're willing to die on, is we don't want to be seen as fundamentalists who don't take science seriously.
Right.
Like that's a very Catholic sort of thing. Like, oh, we have an illness, we're going to ask the experts on this, we're going to ask scientists, we're going to ask doctors, we're going to get their information, we're going to epidemiologists, the World Health Organization, even these words I start to say, the FDA start to have more and more baggage over these past couple of years.
People are being triggered right now just
by saying WHO.
Man.
So I think perhaps then there was a certain naivete within the church of just straight up trusting not science, because there is no science that just exists out there, no matter what Fauci or anyone might say, but to say that every scientist has our best interests in mind, and that there's no vested interests, there are no monetary interests that are dictating and moving decision making. So there needs to be a more critical eye towards these things when looking at policies that are made. But again, that's hindsight. At the time, and I remember conversations with the bishop, with medical experts within our own diocese, the Bishops' Conference of the United States, bishops of Florida. I know the Pope has had these conversations with people of trying to figure out, okay, we got this situation, what's the best way that we can pastorally shepherd within these very narrow constraints that experts at large are basically saying, you can exercise, you can function within this, but don't go into a hospital room with someone with COVID, even if they're dying. Their family shouldn't go into the room with them. And in a sense, almost being told like, well, you might protest that as a Catholic Christian and say, like, I'm willing to die for that person to get the sacraments, which is true for us as priests.
Right.
And so, but then say, but I won't because this is now a rule. Like there's an area within that I think there needs to be a more intentional, maybe healthy maybe not distrust, but questioning of the policies that get put forward in these type of crisis situations, not for the sake of endangering people unnecessarily, but for the sake of what we're participating in, the sacraments of the church, the salvation of souls. Jesus' mission is more important than these rules and regs that oftentimes are coming forward from and are being impacted at least by some questionable information.
Well, and the funny thing is
that political enough way to say that? Like,
nice enough.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to me, I'll always make a Lord of the Rings reference, but it's kind of I've always looked at like the church as kind of being the Council of Ents.
Yeah.
Right, where everything moves very slowly, and like you can sometimes get really frustrated with the church when it moves really slowly. But when the church moves really quickly,
it's usually a mess.
It's
a total
mess,
mess.
and it doesn't always look like the war on Isengard with the Ents going to war and being successful. Sometimes when we move really quickly, and that's the whole thing, is like the church has historically been very cautious and very careful in movement, especially making wide sweeping mandates and wide sweeping directives across the whole body of the church, and especially making wide sweeping directives where you're starting to then, with something which is a question of prudential guidance, and starting to kind of delineate that mandate that and saying that this is an act, that these are mandatory acts of charity. And that's where things like start becoming where you're moving a little quickly, because without the rational thought, and the rational thought is something which is developed in conversation over time. It's not something which has just come that this is my opinion on it. And obviously, in obedience, I mean, I think that there was many people who, in obedience, did things during the crisis that they might not have agreed with.
Right.
Sure.
But like not having public masses on Easter of
yeah,
of
I mean
that year.
That was a big thing. Like the question of closing down the churches. Obviously, I can say, I mean, I understand the mentality behind the closing down of the churches and the mandatory closing of churches, but it also, like, I think that sometimes we only. And this is, I think, that maybe as a point of reflection as the church, we need to go back and we need to look at the holistic effects of things, of how things don't just affect us on a biological level, but where things have also affected us on an emotional level, on a mental level, and on a spiritual level. So like looking at all of these different things, like did the way in which we responded actually help people in a spiritual way, or did it actually harm them?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is like when you make these, and that's where now we're starting to see like the same thing with like what's happened with the coronavirus. Like we're starting to see this already, and I can tell you this as a pastor with a school. We're starting to see this with the COVID gap, like on the not just the educational gap, which happened because of COVID for kids, but also the social gap, like the social skills, as well as the fact that now they're like 2 years behind. There's a bunch of things that are coming out. We're like, was this really the best way? I mean, obviously, we did what I think that most people did what they thought was right with the information that they had, but still there's that question of like, we need to start looking at things not just in a biological sense, but in that wider scope of taking into account the whole person.
And I think that's been the biggest weakness to me so far since all of this happened is we haven't done that.
Haven't talked about it?
We haven't talked about it enough.
Yeah.
We haven't assessed it enough. We haven't, I mean, it's almost like, all right, we got through that. We may have made some mistakes. Now let's move forward, and it's like, well, no, I mean, if this is a possibility of happening again, which we keep being told it's going to happen again, I've been told 2025, 2028. I mean, I've been told all these different
Cynical
years.
me says, is there money to be made? Then yeah, it's
going to happen again. And so,
so it's 28.
We need.
Were they digging through the entrails or the numbers?
I don't know. It's just conspiracy theories. But if we think that not just that it's a remote possibility, but a good possibility, which is what we're being told. It's a good possibility it's going to happen again. Why aren't we talking about this enough? Why aren't we taking all these factors into consideration? It seems like the only time we're taking these factors into consideration is when it's affecting like school or money or pharmaceutics or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
We're not doing it enough in the church. And in the church, it seems like to me, this needs to be an ongoing conversation. Not necessarily where we have an action plan. Yes, to a certain extent, we need a better plan than what we had because we really didn't have one before. But to be able to have a plan that can move with whatever comes down the pike here, and to take those things we've learned into consideration, the things of who we're listening to, how much we're listening to them, and how much of this actually makes sense to what we're doing. And and again,
what's the downstream effects?
The messages that it sends. Because I mean, like you said, you probably get told this too, but I get told by people every week, we went on vacation. We just watched Mass on TV, and they say it like that's a legitimate option. And there's to a certain extent.
Clarification for everyone who's watching.
That's not.
Mass on TV does not satisfy the Catholic's obligation. We are required to go and be present at the Eucharist, even if we don't receive it.
But when I hear it, it makes me mad, not mad at the person, but mad that they see things that way. But it also makes me mad at myself because I have a responsibility in that because I told them that.
We basically said that going to the language that was used during the shutdowns, that Mass was non-essential.
Correct.
That's what we agreed to. We agreed to this principle that society, governments, local, state, federal governments, that they decided, and there's all sorts of machinations behind there that shut down small businesses. I have a whole thing on that. As far as large businesses thrived during this, and small businesses, a lot of them died, a lot of
went away.
So just recognizing the injustice there that we should probably be speaking out more against, but also too, just the reality that we acquiesced. We said, okay, yes, going to Mass is not essential. Receiving Jesus in the Eucharist is not essential. And there's a huge, liquor stores were open. But we were not. There's something within that as a society for people to challenge that. And again, I think there was good faith reasons for it. But the question that we need to ask is, what did this actually teach people? Because no matter what our theology of the Eucharist is, the implicit theology of going to Mass, coming to Mass and being part of the community, of receiving the sacraments, of the absolute necessity. Jesus says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life within you.
Right.
Of those sacraments, all that stuff, man, it's. I think we're going to be that gap you talked about in education, you being the priest at a school, a high school, we're definitely see that in the formation of disciples of a 2-year gap, that we're going to probably continue to see the ramifications of in the years to come. So that to me means that how much more so, instead of merely the biological or the medical voices being the ones that are consulted here, the spiritual voices, the voices of psychologists, the voices of historians that have seen this sort of stuff before, and the voices of good and saintly people who said it's okay to face danger for the sake of the Eucharist.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people right now who in Nigeria are facing death by going to Mass. And for me to say I might get coronavirus, so I shouldn't go to Mass. There's something with that. That should really cause us to examine our own consciences as a society. Say, I'm going to avoid not even death. And again, you can talk about the numbers of people who died from coronavirus, and we all visited people who died from coronavirus. But the reality of how it affected most people was not quite death. But still, I'm not even willing to get sick or be made uncomfortable, or the possibility that somebody else might get sick. There's something within that to me, and I don't mean to be flippant, but says life is dangerous, and we sort of now treat this as if we can control and make life totally safe. And man, that's a scary place to be, because then that starts to give control into the hands of certain people who don't care about your faith, don't care about you receiving the Eucharist, and they're going to continue to make money anyway.
Yeah. I mean,
back to my cynical side.
Well, there's a reason that Jesus spoke about Mammon, and Mammon more than any other topic. He spoke about sexuality and sex 3 times, 4 times, and he spoke about mammon, the pursuit of money and wealth and prosperity, is the most common theme of Jesus's ministry. So
looking back, who made money off this? It wasn't the church. We definitely lost a lot.
We lost a lot from that.
Maybe we deserve it.
Yeah, maybe we deserve that. That's fine. But it's definitely kind of recognizing, okay, that's something that we need to have. I keep mentioning my cynical side. We need to have a little bit of that cynical edge to be able to ask difficult questions, to be able to ask follow-up questions. None of this is calling into mind the good work of doctors and nurses and people that were on the front lines and other things. But when policies start to get put forward that mandate certain activities, mandate vaccines that people are getting fabulously wealthy off of, we need to ask the tough questions as members of the church, because we need to be a sign of something different. And that's hindsight, but that's also hindsight in 2023. Who knows in the coming years how much more we're going to know and understand about what's happened.
That's right. I mean, back to your point, when I can drive through and get a Big Mac, but I can't go and receive the Eucharist, there's something wrong here. And that's the kind of questions we need to ask. So stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment to continue this important conversation.
Whatever the original intent for social media was, it probably wasn't this.
Well, I'm sure you've seen this viral video.
And to the B.
Gaming Week Day 3.
This egg is the most liked Instagram picture.
Hi. Impressive carrying skills, right?
Okay, so tell me all about this.
Yikes. See what I mean? However, at St. Dominic Media, we found a much better way to do social.
It is a joy, a pleasure to want to spend time with the Lord and with one another.
If you delight in the Lord, He would give you the desires of your heart. And so I prayed Him to send me to the right church. And so He led me to the one that He established, which is the Catholic Church.
So I'm sitting in my quiet space, my time with God, praying for my grandchildren.
Understand that the devil isn't only the enemy of our souls, he's the enemy of our human nature. And so what God has joined, He wants to rupture.
Judeo-Christian values.
You corrected it. Judeo-Christian values. Your brain corrected it. Oh, that's fantastic.
Every year, we produce hundreds of dynamic, faithful Catholic videos that reach millions of people, both online and on television. At St. Dominic Media, we're doing the heavy lifting of creating good, quality Catholic content, and we'd love for you to partner with us, either by visiting stdominicmedia.com and following the share link, or by using the offertory envelopes offered by your parish from OSV. Help us sow seeds far and wide as we use new media's potential for good. Together, let us invest in and grow the kingdom.
Welcome back to Catholic in America.
Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And actually, check us out on Patreon as well, because that really helps us. And if you could support us there, that'd be great.
Yeah, we do appreciate all your love and support that you give to us, especially so that we can take this content into other areas. So thank you so much for that. So still talking about coronavirus here and kind of taking
Why
back.
are we still talking about coronavirus?
They're going to stroll down memory lane.
Because what happens when the next pandemic hits?
Yeah, that's why.
That's good. All right.
That's why, and that's kind of how we ended the conversation before the break. And so as we're going forward, where are we today? But where are we with this today?
Do you know
with COVID and
yeah. I mean, I would say a lot of people too. There's a lot of people who still have fear of the coronavirus, or still have fear. Then maybe it's brought up the potential of other respiratory illnesses, and they kind of live in fear of that. I think recognizing that, being sensitive to them, but also my word to them. I had a parishioner who has these fears, and I told this person, I said, we have a relationship of love, so I wouldn't just say to someone I didn't know, I'm like, you're going to die.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. So that can't be like the main thing. Like, my main goal in life is the avoidance of death. That can't be. That's not for us as Christians. Now, again, for someone I don't know who's struggling with that, and they have lots of fears, and they're like, well, and then there's also my family member who has cancer. I don't want to infect them. There's lots of good reasons to have extra levels of safety. But to make that now our identity and the main driving force, I would say, as Catholic Christians, man, we have to have, we got to be different. There's something different within us.
So you're not suggesting wearing a mask while you're riding your bike out in public?
I'm not a doctor, but as I've ridden a bike before, and so I would say don't do that.
It'd be very difficult.
Don't do that.
So
it's impossible to infect somebody too. Can I say that
right.
while you're riding by on a bike as well? Anyway,
it just doesn't seem like it would. Yeah.
But if you're in a car by yourself, then please wear a mask.
That's right.
Yes. Right. Well, see, I do think that is the question. I mean, is we do want to be sensitive to people who still do have a fear of this. We do want to be sensitive to people who have a legitimate fear of this, because there are some people that really getting this virus may not be a good thing. Although, I question now whether, is there anybody still left out there who hasn't had this thing? I know I've got two people in my church that tell me they haven't had it. I believe them. I mean, I don't have any reason not to believe them, but
they're super carriers.
That's what that's where you go with it. And so, how do you help someone who's dealing with this? Not to, you can't turn the whole church over. I had this couple that visited from up north, and I won't say where, but they could not believe that no one in our church was wearing a mask, and they were still wearing their masks. And and I told them, we don't tell people you can't wear masks here. you can wear a mask if you like. And so, we need to find ways to help support them without kind of hampering the rest of the operation itself. And so, matter of fact, when we started at Corpus Christi, we started allowing the precious blood to be distributed again, and we have the chalice now and the cup being shared. And I had a parishioner come up to me and tell me, you can't do this. I mean, do you know how unsafe it is? Do you know how people could get sick from it? And and I finally had to tell them that there's certain things in life that we have to leave to the person's discretion. We can't legislate every single little thing. And so my suggestion to this person was if it makes you feel uncomfortable, don't partake.
Yeah.
It was an optional thing.
Well, then this maybe is kind of another societal-wide thing. Our now tendency to want everything to be a mandate, to want everything to make me feel better. I need it to now be a rule that now I can come to you and police you. And right. think of the level. Imagine if Christians acted this way. The stereotype about Christians is that we're very judgmental. We're Angela from The Office, judgmental, right. Constantly shaming other people, wanting to control them. Maybe sometimes that's the case. But my goodness, what was unleashed in our society as far as to shame other people for not wearing a mask, or shame other people for not being vaccinated, yes. or to get rules to get people fired.
People get fired, yeah.
So there's something within that I think, man, there's a lot of repentance that we need to have when we get a little bit of power and we use it immediately to wield against others. And then almost an offense when someone comes, maybe they're used to that at their church and they come to your church, and there's not a rule about that. And then rushing to you to say, like, why don't you put down this mandate? Because that's what I want you. Yeah, that's a tendency. And again, I'm not exempt from that tendency either. All of us have it, but I think we had a very acute experience of that throughout this whole pandemic experience.
We all do have it, but we also all have a responsibility to fight that too.
Fight against that.
Yeah.
And someone's still good, and I could still love them even if they respond differently than me.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Mike picked up on my smirk a little while ago as you were talking about your friend. The people came from up north, and I was like, well, my experience of being up north is a lot of the churches up there are empty, and they've been empty for a long time.
Right.
So when you come down to
come down here,
and you see
part of the problem. We were full.
I was going to say this was before the corona, but not all places in the north, obviously. But right. But I think that's also important that we have to remember, and maybe I'm being theological, but I think that if theology doesn't infect or intersect into our humanity, into our flesh, and become incarnational, then you know what, like Flannery O'Connor, then I say to hell with it.
Yeah.
So like that's the thing is like theology is important, and like we're an incarnational church. Mm-hmm. Like we believe in Jesus in the flesh, and Jesus who presents himself in our humanity in the flesh. And so I think that as a church, we have to remember that Christ presents himself to us in the flesh. And the flesh is, like you said, dangerous. God himself placed himself in a position of danger when he took on humanity. And it was so much danger that we crucified him as humanity, and we placed him on a cross. And because I do that every day, I sin. Right? So there's a danger of living as a Christian and a follower of Christ who embraced the danger, but also came in specifically in the flesh. And that's why, like, we are a fleshly people. We are a sacramental people. Like, if you don't understand the fleshly nature of the sacraments, all of them, like there's a whole point where, like, I have to put my hand on your forehead. Like, the hands came down upon my head, on our heads and foreheads. Like, we are a fleshly, incarnational, sacramental, and the sacraments have a physical reality to them. And the sacraments are not technological. Like, there's an incarnational. So that's that was a big thing for me, is closing down the churches, like you said, and not allowing people access to the physicality of the sacraments and the physicality of Christ as he presents himself to his church through the sacraments and through the priesthood. And obviously it was for a short period of time, but I do think that we need to go back and re-examine that, especially as we now can see the monumental, and that's part of like double effect. The whole arguments that were made for all the reasons for why these were licit decisions, whether it was the licit decision for why the vaccine was determined as morally licit, right? Not morally admirable, because there was always morally problematic problems with the vaccines, right? But they were determined to be morally licit, as well as like closing down the church and things like that. The principles that were used was as we always have done in the Catholic Church, the principles of double effect.
Right.
So and I think that the church and the Pope and the bishops were completely legitimate in their use of double effect. But part of double effect is also looking at proportionality. And now we can see the proportionality of what happens when you do this, and the proportionality, which is now we're starting to see, oh wow, there's a lot more effects to this than we initially thought. Not dissimilar, maybe I'm not exaggerating it to this point, but like with a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
Like when the nuclear bomb went off in Hiroshima, where people were like, well, the effects were only going to be for this amount of people. And they didn't look at the catastrophic environmental effect, the catastrophic generational effect, the catastrophic. That's where people still try to say that like the bombing of Hiroshima using double effect from a Catholic theology was, and that's what like when you look at proportionality, like now it becomes almost untenable, if not untenable, to say that the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima was morally licit using double effect from the Thomistic perspective. Likewise, looking at all of these monumental effects that we're looking at now, in terms of how the coronavirus and how our response to the Catholic Church did it, I think that it's a valid point to question, like, are we going to react in the same way, or are we going to learn from this and recognize that there's going to be, and if you're going to use double effect, then I teach double effect, like every day, like I'm doing in my ethics class, but I'm like, if you're going to use that double effect argument, you have to account for this. Now we know, proportionality at least wise, that although it might have been morally licit, right? But now with the knowledge that we have today, I think that we have to go back and relook at proportionality and say, is this now with the knowledge we have today, is this morally licit? I would challenge that if we respond in the same way again, like it doesn't, because now we have knowledge, we didn't have it then.
Can I give an example with that too? Because I'm thinking about kind of, so we're a sacramental church, meaning that God speaks to us through signs and symbols and the flesh. You know that you can't receive the Eucharist, you can make a spiritual communion, but that's not the same as actually receiving the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus in the Holy Eucharist.
That's like calling and saying I love you on the phone is the same thing as like
hugging,
absolutely. So there's something beautiful about that. I love you on the phone, and do it. Pick up the phone, right? But we want to be in person with that person much more. So there was a great sign. We brought this up early on. I think we had a conversation about it, maybe off air back when, back a couple years ago, of what was the sign that was given by priests and servers and deacons celebrating Mass, even when we opened back up the churches, and having masks during Mass, during the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. There's something about that, and I think you mentioned it, of a bishop at the time who kind of was very broke. Was it Portland?
It was Portland.
Yeah, that
wrote a beautiful treatise.
Yeah, that this gives a sign in a sense that we're veiling the face at the very time where our face should not be veiled. So there's something important about that. Now, whatever the reasons for it, and medical reasons and other stuff too, that I think you can take those seriously, but you also have to take seriously what is this actually teaching? It's teaching the people that in the again, not maybe the implicit rather than explicit teaching, that as I'm celebrating this Mass, as we're feasting on the bread of angels, as we're looking upon the glory of God, as we're eating the food of immortality, which is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus, I'm scared of death.
Yeah.
And I'm scared of spreading any sort of sickness. That's the message that's coming forward, which that has to be weighed as well.
I think
that's a challenge. I know people would be very angry that I even suggest that, but that's not negligible. That is an important part of what are we displaying. We put specific vestments on during Mass. I don't put a hat on. I don't put like a scarf on. Right. I don't put gloves on when I celebrate Mass. There's specific things we wear because this is not me. This is putting on Jesus Christ, who is our great high priest. And so if I'm adding something onto that, we can't do that lightly. And I think we did kind of do it lightly, say priests will wear masks for the whole time. I celebrated Mass in a major Marian shrine earlier this year, and they still have the mask mandate in place. And so there's nobody around me. I was the only one.
Yeah.
But I was supposed to wear a mask as I came out, and I was like, this is crazy. It was a really awesome experience as well. So, but because I got to be at this major Marian shrine, being the main celebrant at Mass in a different language, but there was something just kind of silly and pro forma and kind of kabuki theater, they call it.
Yeah.
Just put on this mask so that the people out in the world think that we're following, that we're not crazy quacks who don't believe in science. There's some of those elements too that I think, man, we need to get rid of that in the church, definitely.
I mean, I'd say this. I mean, a few weeks ago, I had a horrific cold, flu type thing, and I had to celebrate Mass. So I'll just say this. I mean, I did actually, because I was literally like hacking and sneezing and things like that. Like I went back, I got one of my masks, I put my mask on.
Nice.
And because I was also sitting next to a server and things like that, I'm like, you know what, I'll put it on. I don't have a problem putting it on because one, I had a good reason. Obviously, like
yeah, but that's a little different than what we're talking about. But I agree with you.
But I'm saying just as a point of like speaking on the level of like prudence, and like that's what I'm saying. Like you can't completely discount the voice of prudence, but I agree in that sense. I also agree with what the Bishop of Portland said at the time, as well as today. Like there's certain things where there's the intersection of like our faith has consequences, and to mask carte blanche like the way that we did, right? As well as like there is the visible sign and so forth. Like there's a certain point where our faith manifests itself in our works, and to say that I can do this without the work. I mean, I don't think that I'm extrapolating. I don't think I'm eisegesising and I'm pulling James's words out of context. But like, there's a whole point. Like, our faith manifests in the works of our hands, and the greatest works of our hand as priests is the Eucharist and is the sacrament of the Mass. So there's a certain point where, as a rule of, I'm going to be charitable and prudent in those circumstances. But as a carte blanche across the board, like, no, there's a point where, like, no, the works of my hands means that I'm going to celebrate the Mass, and I'm also going to celebrate the Mass in which it was intended.
Yeah.
Not in the way which is dictated.
Right.
Well, also too. So, and this kind of maybe gets into. I mean, there's so much we could say in the internet. Just do a YouTube search all about the politicization of all this. So, wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, became a political statement. But it also became kind of a pro forma. You're a good person if you do this.
Oh, no doubt.
And you're a bad person if you don't do it.
That's right.
So that was one of the things that maybe I kind of like looking back on. How can we look at that as like, so to say, well, wear the mask for the sake of other people. And that was kind of maybe the tool used, and for the beginning part of the pandemic, I think, in a sense, like we were confused as far as where this was coming from, how it was being spread, but that kind of continued to be a thing within the church context too, that if a priest were to say like, well, I'm not going to wear a mask because, it doesn't really represent what's happening as Jesus Christ, our great high priest, is approaching the altar and laying down his body on the cross, and I want to be a sign of that. So, and I want my face to be seen by the people as I'm saying the words of consecration or giving them the Eucharist. Like,
it was almost vanity.
It kind of becomes like you can't do that no matter for whatever reason you might have. And if you do that, you're spreading illness.
Right. You don't have a good reason. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever the reason is, that's not good enough, and it's vanity for you to do that. I mean, you obviously don't care about these people, and there comes the judgment on it.
But I just have to ask, so do you mean vanity in the sense of like, I'm so beautiful, or vanity in the sense of that wearing a mask is vain?
Vanity in the sense of that my face has to be seen. Of course, there's people that would like to have my face veiled all the time, but that's another thing.
Father Doug, you have a great face.
Well, thank you for joining us for this important conversation.
We're done? I have so much more I want to say. Oh, man.
Yeah, no, we're done.
There's a lot more could be said.
Because, I mean, we're still learning, and we're still asking questions, and I hope that we continue to ask questions as a church. I do know that our bishop and our leadership does ask these questions, and so this isn't something, we're not proposing something here that we're like, man, we wish our bishop would do it. Our bishop is doing it. We're beginning to ask those questions, and to not to make plans for another one, you can't make plans for that, but to really put what we're doing in a context, and to understand, okay, this is kind of the responses. This is what we've learned, and this is kind of the responses that we need going forward. And so hopefully pray for us. Pray for the church in general. Pray for the world itself, that we won't have another pandemic. I mean, we don't want anything like that to ever happen again, and so we really don't want to plan towards that. But we do want to take that into consideration and pray for our bishops. Pray for our Pope especially, with all the decisions that they have to make on a daily basis, especially with this one and it being such a life-altering decisions, so many of them that they had to make with very little information. Pray for them. Pray for us as we continue to move forward in this world. And so God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us in Catholic in America.